Hi, and it's your favorite God's Will recap. Today, I'll be recapping a Nollywood movie titled Fumilayo, Ransom KUTI, which was based on a true life story.
The movie opens up in a house known as the KUTI Republic, where we see an old woman who was relaxed and reading a newspaper. Suddenly, gunshots and armed men burgled into the house and caused chaos. And this same old woman, because of her bravery and courage, tried confronting the soldiers but was being pushed to the floor by the commander of the soldiers, while the commander ordered his men to spread into the house and look for Fela, who happens to be the old woman's son. At the other hand, one of the soldiers got busy dealing with one corner with a female dancer in the house, and because they couldn't find Fela, the old woman was thrown from a 2-story building, and this woman is known as the old Fumilayo Ransom KUTI. The next scene opens in a hospital where a reporter came to listen to the story of the old Fumilayo Ransom KUTI. Luckily, old Fumilayo survived the fall. She welcomed the reporter, and after a couple of greetings exchanged, Fumilayo was ready to tell her story. Suddenly, a flashback was shown where we see a younger Fumilayo who was recognized as Francis as of then, riding a bicycle with her father, who she claimed to be a freed slave but an educated man. While riding, her father told her never to be afraid of anything in this world and never to let anything stop her from achieving what she wants. Then we see Francis reading while her father stepped into the room with a proud smile on his face. It was revealed that Francis has been top of her class during her primary school education, and he promised to sponsor her to finish her secondary school and after that, higher learning. Francis was so happy to hear about this. Unfortunately, there wasn't a female secondary school in Abeokuta, so she had to join the mill, where some students tried to intimidate and bully her, but because of her bravery and courage, she stood up for herself. But this pissed them off, and they tried punishing her by putting her into the well. But the head boy of the school, whose name is Israel, saved her life and punished the mill seniors while he approached her gently to console her, leaving her with a word of advice. After that, Fumilayo and Isaac became good friends, and eventually they fell in love. But Isaac had to leave for Sierra Leone to further his studies. So that intrigued Francis to make him promise her that he would write her a letter every week, and eventually he kept to his promise. A year before Israel's arrival, Francis left for England to further her studies too. The scene then cuts to the Abeokuta arrival station, where we see Francis, who now prefers to be called Fumilayo, coming out of the gate and looking forward to seeing the love of her life, who was right in front of her. Finally, the duo sighted each other and they were so happy to see each other. Fumilayo ran to embrace him and they hugged so tightly, surprisingly looking at each other and seeing how far they've grown now. And they did the mouth-to-mouth stuff. It's been 2 years since the arrival of Fumilayo, and they kept on hanging out and having fun with her fiancé. Fumilayo is so happy to be back home, telling her fiancé how much she is missed home. And he asked if she didn't miss him, but she said she misses him the most, and they did their thing again. Months after months of meeting, Israel decided to ask Fumilayo to tie the knot with him, and she accepted. The movie cuts to the next part where we see Fumilayo getting to meet Israel's parents for the first time, and they gladly accepted her, so then the wedding proceeded. The duos happily got married, but unfortunately for Fumilayo, her father passed on just a year after their wedding. Fumilayo went ahead to open her own school to cater free education for the less privileged children, but for a married woman's son who hasn't been present in school for a few days, her life might have taken an entire different course. The next scene opens up in the market where we see Fumilayo arriving to make enquiries about the boy's absence in school. Then she meets the boy's mom and asks why he hasn't been present in school, but the mom confirmed it was just a minor issue and he will resume as soon as possible. Suddenly, a market woman standing beside him shouted, and everyone was as shocked to see the king's soldiers who had been tormenting the market women for years. The head of the soldiers ordered his men to go into the market and steal all the goods of the market women. While the soldiers were trying to seize their goods, the market women at the other hand were trying to fight for their goods. Instantly, the head of the soldiers pushed Fumilayo to the ground and threatened her not to interfere. Then, Fumilayo stood up fearlessly and gave him a dirty slap. He tried to revenge, but his soldiers stopped him from behind, telling him Fumilayo is a well-respected woman in the society. Fumilayo ordered him to return all the goods he and his men had stolen from them and get out of the market. And they left shamefully while the market women kept on praising Fumilayo. The king felt belittled by Fumilayo, and then he went ahead to scold the head of his soldiers, and his chiefs were left in shock. Few days later, the market woman whose son has been absent for few days brought her son to school. Fumilayo asked the market woman about how they've been coping in the market since the last incident happened, but the woman replied in a pitiful voice, telling Fumilayo about how the market women had been suffering from the king's demands. They pay all sorts of taxes, even the ones that were not necessary. They pay for water that they drink, land that they walk on. They also pay for time they spend in market, and only the women were treated that way. The men were totally free. Fumilayo really felt bad about this, and she, being the most educated woman in her community, decided to report this issue to the district colonial officer of their community. On getting there, she was welcomed by the district colonial officer's secretary, whose name was Beatrice. Fumilayo went into his office in hopes of getting solutions to what she went there for, but he was so unwelcoming. He asked her what she needed. She wasn't there for her own benefits, but to report the unfairness that the Egba community market women receive, but he didn't care about them. He asked her to please
leave his office. That was the only thing she went there for. And then she stood up and left heartbroken, and also a disappointment look on her face. Later on, Fumilayo went visiting her sister-in-law, and she was so amazed to see how well her sister-in-law is doing with her business. She sat down and they did some chit-chatting, but after a while, her sister-in-law also complained about what the king and his chief men had been doing to them, the market women. And then an idea popped into Fumilayo's mind, and she suggested they all come together as women to fight these people. Her sister-in-law thought about it, and it was a good idea, but she was also wondering how they could do that. So Fumilayo decided to reach out to other ladies of the elite of the community who were the educated women, so that they could all form a group called the KUTI Ladies Club, and her husband gave her a full support of whatever she wanted, and they were all gathered together ready for their first ever meeting. On the other hand, while Fumilayo was still introducing her new friends to her husband one after the other, her sister-in-law interrupted, reminding Fumilayo that it was time to go. She left while her husband wished her luck, and they were all excited to meet one another. They all came up with different ideas to help the community women, so they decided to give items and clothes which they were no longer in need of. And they also provided the young ladies of the community with skill acquisition. Not just that, they also gave literate classes to the young women of the community. All these kind gestures were to create a good relationship between the community women and the KUTI Ladies Club. Afterwards, the KUTI Ladies Club decided to take a group picture. While the club were helping the uneducated women, the king increased the taxes of the market women, and he kept on sending his soldiers to destroy their market and seize all their goods. The women tried fighting for what is theirs, but the soldiers obviously overcame them. After some time, Fumilayo brought in a new development into the KUTI Ladies Club. Fumilayo asked for dissolution of KUTI Ladies Club and the formation of KUTI Women Union. Some of the group members were not in support at all, and some even got angry about it. But Fumilayo tried explaining how the community women need their help, most especially the market women. Even at that, some of the women were still not in support. So that intrigued Fumilayo's sister-in-law to ask why some of the women were not in support. But unfortunately, that led to a heated argument between she and one of the club members. So at the end of the meeting, Fumilayo gave them time to think about what she had requested for. That night, Fumilayo was getting ready to go to bed while telling her husband about what has been going on, and she wished there was a way she could make the market women join them. So her husband gave her some words of encouragement, and after that they tried getting intimate, but their first son showed up. And that was really painful for her husband because he had to go to bed that way, and that is a really painful thing. The facial expression on his face said it all, that he was not happy, but he had no choice. After some time, Fumilayo went to the market to check on the market women to interact with them, but she saw the unexpected. That same day, the king ordered the soldiers to go to the market and seize their goods till they are ready to pay their taxes. Fumilayo saw this and she was so sad. The market women were all in tears and were unhappy about what the king had been doing to them, and once more she gave them a reason to all come together to fight these people. The market women started picking points from what Fumilayo was saying. So both the market women and the elite ladies had their first meeting regarding the protest, and they all gave suggestions on how food and water will be provided during the protest, and the market women volunteered to support with the remains of their hidden market goods. During their meeting, the secretary from the district colonial office showed up and was in support of the protest. Before commencing the protest, Fumilayo didn't mean any disrespect towards the king and his palace, so she decided to meet up with the king to ask him to please reduce the taxes placed on the market women. But on getting there, the chiefs were so unwelcoming and they looked at her with different bombastic side eye. For once, the king never replied her. The chiefs were always the one replying her, and they kept on shutting her up, so they asked her to leave because the king will not grant her request. This made Fumilayo angry and she decided to proceed with the protest. The day of the protest came and they all marched to the palace in the same attire known as the Ashoibi. On arriving at the palace, Fumilayo kept on hailing and praising the women. They kept on protesting on and on till one of the king's chief informed the king about the situation on ground, in which the king was already aware of. The king queried his chief and asked if it was the first time he was hearing noises. The king told his chief that the women protesting outside should be the less of their worries, cause when they get beaten by the rain and heated by the sun, they will eventually get tired and go home. But it seemed like their team leader Fumilayo and her group members really meant business. They laid there all night and kept on protesting till they slept off. 3 days later, the protest grew massively because women from different parts of the Egba community joined the protest, and the protest was spreading widely to the extent that even journalists came to interview Mrs. Fumilayo. She said she wasn't doing it for herself, she was doing it for the women who needed their freedom. The protest was now on the local newspaper. This pissed the king off and he decided to deal with them in his own way. To instill fear in them, the king sent masquerades forbidding for women to see. But it was as if the protesters knew this was coming and they prepared for it. They also called on their mothers who were also masquerade, and they lay bare their chest, which was forbidden for the masquerades to see. The head of the mothers ordered Fumilayo to say what she wants, and Fumilayo stood fearlessly in front of the masquerade and she cut off his necklace that contained all his powers and charms. The women cheerfully rejoiced for conquering the male masquerade. Surprisingly, they never ran out of food to eat because everybody contributed to the protest. The district colonial officer of their community sent his assistant to look into the matter of the protest, because the women were already causing enough chaos and it is his job to make sure that everything in the communities goes the right way. So the assistant asked the king to do something about what was going on. This made the king to demand Fumilayo's presence for negotiation, but her teammates decided to come with her. On her arrival to the king's presence, the district colonial officer's assistant offered a 10% deduction from the tax rates being given to the market women on the condition that she call off the protest, but she disagreed. Fumilayo demanded for the expulsion of 3 things if they wanted the protest to end. First, the water rate tax, second, the time rate tax, and third, the salaries of the king's chief that were gotten from the hard-working pockets of the market women. This pissed the king off and he ordered all his soldiers to physically abuse the market women and afterwards lock them up in the palace cell just to teach them a lesson. While Fumilayo was at the palace cell, emotions got the best part of her, and she was so sad about how she and the market women were treated. She thought of giving up countless times, but she remembered what her father said to her. She shouldn't be afraid of anything in this life and never to allow anything to stop her from achieving what she wants. After she was released from the palace, she got treated from injuries she obtained from the palace. The nurse told her she needed to rest for the injuries to heal better, but Fumilayo was so determined to win the protest. Moreover, her husband was in support of her 100%. Her husband came closer and hugged her, telling her he gives her his full support and leaving her with some words of encouragement and motivation. Fumilayo was so happy about this and she was so grateful to God for having a husband like him. After their arrival at the palace, the king was mad and was surprised how they still had the nerves to come back after what his soldiers did to them. One of the chiefs told the king it was no longer safe for them to be in the palace and they needed to leave. But the king angrily said that it was a taboo for him to leave his palace for mere women. The chief told him that the women were many because they came from different communities to help the Egba women. But the king told him that no matter how many they were, they are still small to him and he will never leave his throne for mere women. This time around, the women protesters didn't just come to protest, they came to take what was rightfully theirs. The women sang songs of motivation as they tried venturing into the palace. As the women tried to breach the defense of the soldiers, a guard came to inform the king about the situation on ground. The same king that claimed he wouldn't leave his throne for any woman stood up and left fearfully, but he couldn't leave without his staff. So the head of the soldier assured him that he would retrieve it, they should just go. Besides, he wouldn't kill himself because of a throne. Unfortunately for the king, the women overcame the palace security and they burgled into the palace. The soldiers all ran for their life. The head of the soldiers retrieved the king's staff, but the women ganged up against him and overcame him, collecting the staff from him. And that was how they won the fight. And the king will be dethroned because it's a taboo for a woman to hold his staff. The king shamefully left the palace full of regrets, and the women all rejoiced happily. The media published the victory of the Abeokuta Women's Union against the king of Egba land. The Abeokuta Women's Union won, but Fumilayo lost. It was revealed that her husband had cancer all along, but he pretended and he kept it away from her so she wouldn't try to stay back and abandon the protest. Alas, her husband, Israel KUTI, died, and that was the devastating news for her family and the whole community. Now we've been taken back to the present, where we see the narrator, old Fumilayo Ransom KUTI, finishing up her story. She said she achieved nothing without Israel's support, and the reporter gave her condolence as she bid her goodbye in Yoruba, a local Nigerian language, while Fumilayo gave her a kudos. After the reporter left, Fumilayo remembered her old days and all the good times she spent with her husband, Israel. At the end of the movie, it was revealed that Fumilayo was the first woman to drive a car in Nigeria, and her legacy for fighting for the oppressed was imbibed by all her children, who all became heroes. As the movie comes to an end, please kindly like, subscribe and turn on your post notifications so that anytime we drop new movies like this, you will be alerted. Thank you.